Welcome and thank you for tuning in once again to the fastest growing college football podcast in the country. This is Always Talking Ball, and I'm your host, Tyler Noe, alongside another host. He's not a co-host, guys. We're equal partners here. Lance Barton is here as well. We're going to preview a couple of games that are taking place this Thursday night. We're also going to play everyone's favorite game, which is Guess the Spread. Yeah, that's right. It's back for another season, which if anyone out there wants to send us a quick, 5-second, 10-second game show jingle, that would be great for that. But before we get to that, make sure if you're watching on YouTube, click that subscribe button right below. Click that like button as well. Throw us a comment or two as well. Let us know how much you like the show, or let us know how much we suck at what we do. All right, Lance, we had a couple of games in week 0 just to give us a taste of college football. Let's break down the big one to start off the show. Florida State versus Georgia Tech took place in Dublin, Ireland this past Saturday to get us going. Man, it's not time to overreact, but let me just overreact for a little bit, okay? When you take a favorite to cover 10 points and they lose outright, you're a little shook, okay? So I got to do a lot of self-evaluating, self-reflection. Week 0 is kind of like spring training for college football bettors, so I've got to go back to the drawing board and get ready for week 1.
Yeah, it's also spring training for odds makers. Obviously, with making Florida State 10.5 point favorite, they made SMU a 20-something. What was it, like 27? Around that 20, somewhere between around that range.
It went up to like 27, yeah.
Yeah, around 27 points. And then also too, the New Mex Montana State game. Montana State was laying 13.5 on the road and barely squeaked that one out at the end. But
Hawaii favored by 40.
Right, exactly.
Against a team that couldn't even make it to Hawaii barely with their flights.
Yeah. So it was odds makers were off their game week 0, no doubt about it. But as far as the Florida State Georgia Tech game, I mean, it's just as simple as to say that Georgia Tech just dominated the line of scrimmage. They did. They dominated the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. When that game started out, when Florida State went right down the field, ran the ball right down Georgia Tech's throat, you thought that this was another Georgia Tech defense where tackling was optional, and like the rush defense that Georgia Tech had last year, that's what they looked like on that opening possession. And then you saw what a defense could be when you go out and hire a really good defensive coordinator, like it looks like Georgia Tech has done, a new DC, Tyler Santucci, who was coaching under Mike Elko at Duke and coached under Mike Elko at Texas A&M. That looks to be one hell of a hire by Brent Key, because that was the biggest difference with this Georgia Tech team. Georgia Tech could play on the offensive side of the ball last year. They could run the football. Haynes King was exciting. Jamal Haynes was exciting as a running back last year. They could run the football. They could put up points on offense last year, but they couldn't stop a nosebleed. Now, again, it's one game, but that defense looked dialed in yesterday after that opening possession against Florida State. They were just coming downhill, attacking the line of scrimmage, because they did not respect Florida State's downfield pass game at all with DJU, because Norvell and Florida State wasn't calling any. They weren't calling any downfield passes. Everybody is all over DJU today and was all over him yesterday. And I'm just honestly going to play a little devil's advocate here on that and say that, I mean, yes, DJU is what he is at this point. He might improve throughout the year under Norvell, because Norvell is still a really good offensive coach. But it was obvious that yesterday Norvell did not trust him. And he wasn't even calling anything on downfield passes, or wasn't calling anything in the downfield pass game, like, period. And until they had to trust him there late in the fourth quarter, when they went forward on the multiple fourth downs there on that last offensive drive there for Florida State to tie the game up. Late there in the fourth quarter, and DJU made some big-time throws in a really tough pressure situation. But, I mean, what do you think on that? Do you think that it was more DJ was just trash, or do you think it was more handicapped necessarily by the play calling and Norvell not trusting him yesterday?
No, it was definitely the play calling. I mean, he was fine. He is what he is, like
Yeah.
you said. I mean, I'm not going to ever back him again. I just can't do it, you know. And I text you during the game, like, Norvell doesn't trust him, but he hasn't given any of his three coaches ever. Dabo Swinney, Jonathan Smith, and now Mike Norvell, any reason to trust him. Like, obviously, when they did start calling plays and they were down by 7 in the fourth quarter, he made some big-time throws on fourth downs.
Yep.
Georgia Tech's, pass defense was a little suspect. And, I mean, when you're going to rush 3 and then play zone, I mean, that happens all the time. And we see that more often than not, a lot of these big-time college quarterbacks are going to be able to make those throws. But, I mean, on the other side of the ball, he may not have had like as high a QBR as DJ or whatever, but Haynes King like controlled the game from start to finish in my mind.
100%.
I mean, granted, like one time, we're all, crushing DJ for his play, which it was average, which is fine to be expected from him. And Haynes King on the other side of the ball was like 3 for 5 for like 18 yards. Like nobody was talking about that, but that's because he was making a difference on the ground with his legs. I think he ended up with like 50 yards rushing.
And he wasn't turning the ball over, which is what his issue was last year.
Yeah.
16 picks last year. He wasn't turning the ball over yesterday.
Yeah. But like you said, I mean, the more concerning part for Florida State is the offensive line and the defensive line. And you talked about that first drive, offensive line had no issues against that Georgia Tech rush D, which looked like it was going to be, similar to last year. Florida State, after that first drive, only gained 40 yards on the ground the rest of the game.
Yep.
So they made some adjustments, and it looked like Florida State didn't make a lot of adjustments after that. So, honestly, it felt like, the whole defensive line, too, for Florida State, with all the talk. I mean, even Pete Thamel, before the game, is saying Florida State defensive line is the best in the country. This felt very, very eerily similar to talking about the Alabama offensive line last year, right? Where everyone was just talking them up and everything. And all of a sudden they just get worked. And so maybe this is a case where Georgia Tech has improved a ton. And over time, we're going to see the fact, because that second game against Texas last year with Bama, they didn't look great. Over time, maybe this defensive line will look better. Maybe Georgia Tech is actually a really good team this year. We don't know. So it's not time to overreact yet, but man, like that and like the lack of tackling that I saw from the Florida State defense. I mean, Jamal Haynes was just dropping guys. Like they were running. I mean, dude, you were talking about Tyler Santucci. How about Buster Faulkner? You should get, that's a name you should get to know. That dude was painting a masterpiece with that play calling. I mean, they were ripping off 8-minute drives against Florida State's defense. And it seemed like they were just doing whatever they want. If they got into a third down, hey, whatever. Like even that last drive of the game, it was, after they muffed that snap and you put them at like 3rd and 16, you're like, oh man, that's like a 55-yard field goal now. Whatever. We're just going to do a quick pass to the left, have the guy run for 10, 12 yards, get a nice 44-yard field goal. It was just stuff like that. It was kind of like, Georgia Tech just kind of did whatever they wanted yesterday on offense.
Yeah, to me,
but yeah,
the story, man, is not necessarily like how bad Florida State was. No, the story was how good Georgia Tech was in that game, in my opinion. You've already said it. People love to overreact after week 1, especially on a week 0 game where we don't really a whole world was watching that game. Literally, the game was in another country, so like the whole world was watching that game, and everybody expected what they expected from Florida State. And look, I thought Florida State was going to win the game too. I didn't give out an official pick on the game, but I thought Florida State would win the game. But I did say on our previous episode that what worries me with Florida State is yes, they went out and got some transfers in the portal. They did not get guys that were anywhere near as good overall, especially on offense on the perimeter, that were as good as Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. And they didn't get guys they got a solid defensive line. But that defensive line is not Braden Fisk and Jared Verse. They're not. Obviously, what we saw yesterday, that's the case. I think that this Florida State defensive line, even looking at them, they look like pass rushers. They don't look like just dogs on that D-line that's going to stuff the run. Maybe they get better throughout the year. Maybe that turns out to be that maybe we're talking about later in the year how good this Georgia Tech team, we're looking back on it going like, damn, this Georgia Tech team was really good.
Well, the problem is with Florida State is like they're going to have to build a lead, which they can do, right? They could do against subpar teams, but if they get against a team like, they're going to play Clemson in a couple weeks and they're going to play Miami, like they're going to have to jump out to a lead to allow those pass rushers to get into obvious passing downs to make an impact on the game. Yeah. And if they can't stop the run, they're going to play against, Clemson's offensive line and their skill players, and they're playing against Miami and Damian Martinez and Cam Ward and those guys. Like, Virginia Tech's got a killer run game. Like, there's teams in the ACC that are going to make you pay with the running game, and you've got to find ways to stop that.
Yep, and I didn't see really anybody say this. Of course, we saw just about every take imaginable on Twitter and on social media after the game and on ESPN from different folks or whatever, what they had to say after the game. I didn't see anybody saying this one. You brought up a great point when we were talking about preseason rankings and how they're a joke and how you shouldn't look at a team and factor in their schedule when preseason ranking a team because they have not played that schedule yet. And the example we used was Florida. And we were talking about how tough Florida's schedule was. Well, yesterday on College Game Day and during the game, they were talking about, according to FPI and all these different things, the toughest schedules in the country. And Georgia Tech had a top 5 toughest schedule overall in the country. They've got the toughest schedule in the ACC based off of preseason. Well, I want a newsflash here to 11 other football teams that are on Georgia Tech's schedule. Their schedule just got a lot tougher now because they've got to play Georgia Tech. And that's why when you look at preseason rankings that you don't – I'm not saying Georgia Tech should have been like maybe ranked top 15 or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. Point being is everybody just writes off teams because they look at – and sometimes we're guilty of it. You just write off a team because you look at their schedule and go – oh, well, that's a loss, or whatever like that. And you don't really you look at Georgia Tech, if you actually look deep into what Georgia Tech did last year. Opened up with Louisville, had Louisville beat, but ended up blowing the game at the end. Beat Miami. I know the Miami thing happened with Cristobal. There had multiple games last year where Georgia Tech was playing they took Georgia to the wire in the game against Georgia last year. That was a solid football team last year. They just couldn't get out of their own way and they were turning the football over and didn't have a good defensive coordinator, things like that. And so now, the way it looks like there's 11 other teams that are on Georgia Tech's schedule that their schedule just got a lot tougher because they got to deal with the Jackets and Brent Key. With Florida State, the only thing that I will say that I'm not trying to overreact on is if DJ is just what he is, if he doesn't improve much throughout the year and they can't trust him at all to push the ball downfield, because the offensive line did get whipped a little bit by Georgia Tech, no doubt about it, but I think most of that was because Georgia Tech's defense was just attacking the line of scrimmage, playing downhill, playing only 7 or 8 yards off the ball because they didn't respect the downfield pass game. But that's also Florida State's fault for not making them respect that. So if Florida State's going to continue that and they want their MO to run the football, they're not going to be able to line up and just run the football down people's throats if nobody's going to respect the pass game. You'll see a lot of the same stuff, what you saw yesterday. So
you think that last drive by Florida State is going to allow Norvell to trust him a little more?
Right. That's what I'm saying. I think that it's possible that Norvell's one of the best offensive coaches in the game, but I think it's fair to say that he didn't call a great game yesterday. He didn't. He played, in my opinion, a lot of that game. I think he felt like that if we just don't make mistakes, play defense, whatever like that, we can win this game and get out of here with a win. And he was afraid to open the playbook up, is what it seemed like. I'm not saying that's what he was, but it's definitely what it looked like. But, at this point, it's, again, 12-team playoff. There's no reason to hit the panic button yet for Florida State. I know everybody else is doing that for them. But I've just seen too many times the last few years after week one, week 2, or whatever, people just bury a team and then they're sitting there at the end of the year in a playoff hunt or a conference championship hunt. There's still plenty of big-time athletes and really good players and a great coaching staff for this Florida State team. They're just going to have to regroup and figure out as far as the game plan is concerned on offense, to be able to push the ball down the field. But I'm a little concerned. My concern going into the year was they did not replace Keon Coleman and Wilson and some of those other receivers. I didn't see anything yesterday that made me think that they had. Nothing's changed my mind on that. And as far as Roydell Williams, who is a backup at Alabama, he wasn't very good at Alabama either. He was fine. He's okay and stuff. But he's not some big time game breaking tailback that should be playing for a team that's competing for championships like Florida State fans want their team to compete for. That's not what Roydell Williams is. I don't know. it's interesting. But last take I want to give on this game when I ask you a question here. Going into this year with this 12-team playoff, we talked a lot about how conferences were wide open, especially in the Big 12. Kind of seems that way a little bit going into the year with the ACC. There were multiple teams kind of in that like 5 to 6, 7 teams range. In the ACC, I guess we should say 7 now with Georgia Tech, 7 or 8 with Georgia Tech. Do you think that yesterday was an indicator, or is it just week 0? Do you think it was an indicator that college football is what we're going to see going forward this year, that there's a lot of teams that can compete with each other on any given Saturday, and there aren't as many teams that are just completely separated themselves from other teams in each conference?
Yeah, I think we saw that, and we touched on it last year, like all year, how I think with the transfer portal and everything, I mean, teams, the gap is going to close. Like, you're not going to see those dominant Bama teams like that you saw in the mid 2000s or mid 2010s, right? And you're not going to see like the USC teams of the early 2000s. Like, the gap is closing because the talent is more spread out.
Yeah.
And I think obviously that's a case even more so in a conference like the ACC and like the Big 12. Maybe the SEC and the Big 10 especially are a little more top heavy.
Yeah, I was going to say the Big 10 is the only one that I can think of that there is just a dramatic difference between the athletes at Oregon and Ohio State and a couple of those 4 or 5 teams at the top of the Big 10 and the 7 bottom tier teams in the Big 10. The athlete and like the overall talent level is a massive drop off there. But I don't think that's the case in between 10 teams in the SEC, 7 or 8 teams in the ACC, 10 teams in the Big 12. I think that's a sign, man. It's going to be an exciting year on any given Saturday this year that anybody can beat anybody in a lot of these games. I think that's what you're going to see this year.
Yeah, the overactions were off the chart yesterday. I mean, I even saw someone saying, well, maybe Florida's schedule isn't as tough as we thought. And I'm like, we played one game, and it's the last game on Florida's schedule. Like, let's not go there. Okay, Florida State, again, 12-team playoff, people. They can still easily make the playoff. I know it was a conference game, so that kind of stings. But, I mean, they could lose another conference game, or they could lose to Notre Dame, right?
Yep.
10-2, win the conference, you're still in the playoff. So the season is not over for them. Obviously, Georgia Tech's number 1 in the country right now, right? So they just keep winning every week. They're going to be in the playoffs. So
just a reminder, guys, because obviously this is near and dear to me. You already brought it up a minute ago, but think back to last year after Alabama got beat by Texas, and then that South Florida debacle where they almost lost to South Florida. After that game, you would have thought that Alabama couldn't get a first down on offense. DraftKings and places like that made their win total 8.5 for the rest of the year. You wouldn't have thought that Jalen Milroe would have turned into what he turned into down the stretch last year. So, I mean, we've seen it many times every year where everybody freaks out and overreacts. So, for anybody to think that this Florida State team is dead, buried, and gone, this is a great motivating factor for them the rest of the way, that maybe they could turn this around and like right the ship and end up getting in the college football playoff. Because again, there's 12 teams that get in this thing now. They're good enough talent-wise to win every game on the rest of their schedule. But they're also, the questions that I have right now, they also can go 8-4, like with this schedule. So probably somewhere in between is where it ends up, more than likely.
Yeah. You mentioned the 8:00 game last night, 8:00 Eastern, SMU at Nevada. Any takeaways from that game? I know SMU was kind of talked up, and I mean, that was a big one for me to win on the over for the win total. That was again, they were favored by almost 27, and
sloppy, man.
It was a sloppy game from what I saw. I didn't watch the whole thing, but from what I saw, it was a sloppy game. And they just some turnovers. Obviously, Preston Stone found a connection with that wide receiver. Was RJ McDonald, is that right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so he had like 8 catches for 162 yards. He made the game-winning touchdown. It was cold in Reno. It was windy. It's week 0. It's a road game. You're not used to playing, at Nevada and stuff. So any takeaways from Rhett Lashley?
Yeah, well, my takeaway on it is that was a prime example of, new head coach at Nevada, Jeff Choate, who was co-defensive coordinator at Texas last year. I mean, it's obvious that he has established a mindset of, like, sometimes when you see teams that take on the personality of their coach and like the way that they play, the fact you saw Georgia Tech with Brent Key, he's all about offensive line, run the football, and Nevada showed up last night. It was very apparent very early. They showed up with bad intentions. Like, they were literally no regard for human life. And early in that game, they were starting.
It was chippy.
Yeah, chippy. They were starting fights. They were coming at SMU with just, like, again, with no regard for human life. Didn't give a shit about SMU is how they acted. And I think SMU showed up probably a little bit caught off guard. Probably thought as a 27-point favorite that they were just going to go in there and just spank Nevada at Nevada. Nobody expected anything from Nevada, and Nevada showed up ready for a street fight. And hats off to SMU, though, that they were able to regroup and come back there in the fourth quarter like they did and get a win. Because at the end of the day, just win, baby, win. Especially in this new 12-team playoff era. Style points and things like that aren't going to come into play until, I guess they do, maybe later in the year. But at this point, just win. But it was sloppy as could be on SMU's part. And again, the overreactions. Many, many people after that game were, gosh, the ACC sucks. This SMU team that a lot of people were picking to go over their win total, they suck. They're not going to be able to even be bowl eligible this year. It's just amazing that after one football game, but in today's social media era, that's how people act. I think SMU will be fine. I honestly think that's the definition of, if you're Rhett Lashley and you could probably talk to him behind closed doors, he loved what happened.
Yeah.
Still got out of there with a win. But as bad as they played and as sloppy as they played, they were in a dogfight. They faced adversity and had to come back in the fourth quarter like they did. There's a lot of good things that came out of that as far as a coaching perspective of what he can do with that SMU team. So I don't take anything up. Really, we know Preston Stone can play. I'm not worried about. He was sloppy as could be as well. I'm not worried about that. He'll be fine. But my main concern, I think, with SMU would be sometimes I'm sitting there watching and it looked like at the line of scrimmage on the offensive side of the ball they weren't as strong. Like there were some question marks about them on their offensive line going into this year. I would say that they weren't really answered in yesterday's game. But again, it's early, plenty of season to play. Got out with a W.
Yeah, they're going to have to get that offensive line shored up for ACC play. They've got Houston Christian next week, which no problem.
Yeah.
BYU on a Friday night after that, probably, at home. It'll be a good one. TCU coming in. That'll be a tough one. And then, that big game against Florida State now, in week 5. So those will be good ones to watch for SMU, but let's move on. Let's get to a little guess the spread here. All right. This is if you're new to the show this year, this is part of the show where I test Lance's knowledge on college football as a whole and power ratings and where he thinks, if he's in line with Vegas, and maybe he thinks, something shorter or longer than it should be, maybe that's telling him something. So we'll see where he is in Vegas. I'll pick out some games here.
I want to give a disclaimer. It's going into week 1 here. Last year, probably my roughest week was going into week 1, but hey, we dialed it in. And to your point, it was amazing, man, last year, how many people were actually reaching out talking about, man, we love that segment, Guess the Spread. Like, that was some people's favorite segment. So love it, man, because you were the one that came up with that and ended up being a big hit last year. So we're going to do it again. So let's ride and see if I can guess any of these.
We're going to skip a couple of Thursday games because somebody might have some picks for those games, so they may already know some lines there.
Yep.
We'll talk about those here in a second. Let's just skip ahead to Saturday, and let's skip ahead to a little big noon kickoff. Right now, as of Sunday evening, we're going to go to Penn State at West Virginia. What do you think the spread is at this moment?
I'm going to say Penn State 9.5, 10.
It's actually Penn State 8.5.
Ooh, okay.
Right now. It was about 10.5, maybe a week or so ago, and money's coming in on West Virginia. It's down to 8.5.
Money on the Mounties. Okay.
You can even find an 8 at ESPN Bet. So, Let's see here. We got another big game at noon, and it's Atlanta. Clemson versus Georgia. Where's the line at?
Probably dogs 14.
Dogs 13.5.
13 and a half.
Right on par.
Okay.
How about your Hokies taking on the Commodores in Nashville, Vanderbilt?
I just want to say that's interesting, man, that they've got it at 13 and a hook and not 14.
Who, Clemson, Georgia?
Yeah. That's interesting.
Well, you can find 14 on ESPN. Again, they're always, a half point higher.
Okay. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Who we got next?
Virginia Tech at Vanderbilt.
Ooh. Hokies. Gosh. Probably 13, 14, around that 2-touchdown range on the road.
Yeah, you're right on 13.5.
13.5?
Again,
Okay.
look, yeah, not 14, so 13.5.
Okay.
How about this one? South Dakota State at Oklahoma State. Giving you an FCS team here to see what you think they're power rated at.
The Jackrabbits. The new FCS power. It's no longer the Bison. It's the Jackrabbits. Oh, man. Oh, Oklahoma State. I'm probably way off here because I'm sure I have no idea what oddsmakers would think. I'm gonna what I think. I'm gonna go with what I think. You're not what oddsmakers would think. I'm gonna say Oklahoma State 14.5.
Oklahoma State minus 10.
That is some serious respect for the Jackrabbits at Oklahoma State.
At Oklahoma
With all that
State.
return in production for the Pokes?
I know.
Okay.
But hey, Oklahoma State struggled in the past. They struggled last year with South Alabama. You just never know how Gundy's teams are going to perform at the beginning of the year.
Look, man, I'll say this. You saw like the way they, as much as they favored SMU or whatever, for them to only have that at 10, that's interesting.
Yep.
That's one of those lines trying to tell you something type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
Okay.
That was
let's get to a game that we're for sure going to talk about on an episode coming out on Thursday. And that's the one in Gainesville, Miami at Florida, Canes at the Gators.
Okay, I'm going to give a disclaimer on this one. I don't want to cheat. I've obviously looked at this one because I like Florida.
I think everyone's probably looked at this one.
I like Florida in this game, and we'll talk about it more. I'm not going to give it out as an official pick yet. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the last I saw it, the Canes were like 2.5, 3.
Yep, the Canes are still minus 2.5 right now.
Okay. Yeah. So I just wanted to give a disclaimer. Didn't want to cheat. Didn't want to act like I was Nostradamus on that one.
Did you look at the Notre Dame A&M game?
Yeah, I did. I looked at that one too. That is A&M 3, right?
It is 3 in some spots. Yeah, mostly 2.5 though.
Okay, 2.5. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So those are the only two I believe. I guess I'm mistaken. One. Those are the only two I believe that I looked hard at because I'm probably going to have action in those games and the ones on Thursday night that I already told you.
Yep, I will be at that Texas A&M Notre Dame game on Saturday. Can't wait. If any listeners out there are going to be at the game or whatever, hit me up. I'll be down. We'll be at the tailgates and everything before the game, so be glad to meet y'all and everything. But let's give you a couple fun ones. This is Western Kentucky at Alabama. Did you look at that one?
No, I really haven't. The Tide is 34.
31.5 for the Tide.
Okay. 31.5. Interesting.
You have the
if you don't, it's okay. Do you have the total in front of you for that game?
I do not.
Okay.
I will get that here in a second.
That's fine. Don't worry about it.
Fresno State at Michigan, game we talked about. Gosh, we talked about 5 or 6 weeks ago. I think that Jeff Tedford was still the head coach at that time, but we're talking about Fresno State at Michigan here. Opening game for the defending national champions. 7:30.
Michigan 21.5, somewhere around 3 touchdowns.
It is 21.5 right now. It was 20.5 probably about a month ago, so it has gone up over that 21-point mark.
Yeah, the no Jeff Tedford thing. They were definitely kind of that a dog that I think that you were even like at one episode were saying that might be a little interesting week one, depending on what that line is. But
Yeah.
with no Tedford, I can't get involved with
Yep.
Fresno on that. I got to see what they're like without him.
Yeah. Let me know if you looked at this one. We're going to Sunday night on at 7:30 out in Vegas. LSU versus USC.
That is the other one I've looked at. I have because I have interest in that one. That would be USC plus 4.5, LSU minus 4.5, right?
Yeah, it's 4.5. It was what 6.5 a
Yeah.
couple weeks ago when we talked about
That's
it.
why I looked at it because it's been getting my attention. That the line moving in that spot.
Yeah, and then I'm not going to give you this one, but it is interesting to see that Boston College, Florida State opened up at Florida State minus 23, and now it's down all the way down to 17. It's a home game for the Seminoles Monday night. Obviously, they've already played week 0. I know there's some betting nuggets out there for teams who played in week 0 who are playing the next week, and whether it's jet lag or whatever. But that's an interesting 6-point move there, I think.
It is, man. Oh, Bill O'Brien at Boston College, but that's the definition.
Yeah.
That is the definition of what we're talking about, man. People are going to overreact, and I'm intrigued to see what the public may come in on Boston College, but I'm intrigued what the Sharps do with that.
Yeah.
But again, they may not be. They just may not be very good. I don't know. We'll see. But with O'Brien and the quarterback back at Boston College, got a good, solid dual threat quarterback there. That could be a little interesting.
Yep.
No doubt.
Since you brought it up, what do you think the total is of the Alabama game?
So if you said 31 and a half.
Yep.
Is it in the 60s?
Nope.
Okay, so they're not really expecting Western Kentucky to score much, obviously. I don't have 50. It's not in the 60s. It's got to be high 50. 58? 59?
It's close to 60. It's 59 and a half.
59 and a half. Okay. 59 and a half. So that would, okay. Because the reason, we'll talk more about it later, but the reason why I'm saying that is because, TJ Finley's a quarterback at Western KY this year, and Western Kentucky's been one of the better, I'm not going to say best offensive teams overall in the country because they're a group of 5 team, but they've been one of the best offenses, if not the best, most consistent offense in the group of 5 in the last 4 or 5 years, dating back to Bailey Zappi, and just one year after another. Western KY, they score. They put up points. So TJ Finley played at LSU, played at Auburn. He's played against Bama multiple times. So interesting to see if Western Kentucky, I don't think they'll stop Alabama at all, but they might score a few points themselves. That's why I was curious what that total was.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Thursday night. Let's get to a couple games. I know you got some picks in these games and some breakdowns for us.
Bets of the year coming out here today, baby.
Yep. So let's start off with Dion in Colorado taking on North Dakota State, the Bison.
Yep.
They are not the Bison of old, as you've mentioned, and as you've said multiple times on multiple different episodes. Colorado comes into this game as 9.5-point favorites. Pretty much anywhere you look, you can find a 9 out there, you can find a 10 out there, but consensus 9.5. Dion in Colorado once again in the news for all the wrong reasons, banning that reporter who literally is just doing his job, and it just seems hypocritical to everything he's preached and how he's said he's at Colorado for a higher reason and all this stuff, and it just seems like such a weak look. And my thoughts. If you've listened to this episode if you've listened to this episode in the off season, my thoughts on Colorado already. Can't stand him. I'm just going to be outright with it. If he wants to ban our podcast being played in the state of Colorado, that's fine. But I just, the way they're going about things, I just can't stand it. And I just think they're a joke of a program. Be out there, and I took them under 5.5. They may make me look dumb. I don't know, but I'm just not on the Buffs at all. He's bringing a lot of hype and excitement around them, but they're not a serious team. They're not a serious program in my eyes. So with that being said, that's your welcome, and that's your introduction to Always Talking Ball 2024 season edition. I'm going to let Lance get talking about the actual game that's coming up and see if he's got a side or two.
You just teed me up really nice there. So if Dion wants to ban this from the state of Colorado, just ban half the screen, because I'm going to try to help us get in the state of Colorado here, because I actually like the Buffs Thursday against the spread. My first bet of the year is going to be on the Buffs. I've found a couple of 9s out there, so I'm going to place Colorado -9 as my first best bet of the year. And here's the thing here. Everybody you talk to in the general public, all they talk about, that North Dakota State, man, the Bison, that FCS power, all of that, they're not the same Bison team. And also, all of those people are saying that, and it seems like that there's some of the general public here are coming in on North Dakota State, and the line keeps going up. The line opened at 7.5. Now it's up to around 9.5. North Dakota State lost 4 games last year. They lost 3 games the year before. They lost their head coach, Matt Entz. He left to go to Lincoln Riley and D'Anton Lynn's staff and that defensive staff at USC. And they've got a new head coach, Tim Pulasic. He used to be coach at North Dakota State under Craig Bohl, who's the one that built the North Dakota State program. He was the offensive coordinator the last 3 seasons under Craig Bohl at Wyoming, and their offense was trash at Wyoming the last 3 years. So I don't care at all that he was the offensive coordinator under Craig Bohl at Wyoming. And again, this North Dakota State team is still a really good football team at the FCS level. They're not the same Bison team, though, that kind of like the South Dakota State, for example. They're playing at Oklahoma State, and you told me that line was 10 a minute ago. North Dakota State's not South Dakota State right now. They're just not. And I do think North Dakota State will have some success running the football a little bit. They're tough. They're still going to be physical at the line of scrimmage. That's their MO. That's not going to change. But the difference in athlete at the skill position level in this game is insane. Shadur Sanders, Travis Hunter, LeJontay Wester, all those dudes at receiver for Colorado, like 5 deep. Jimmy Horn Jr., Dallin Hayden at running back. I mean, they've got the skill level is complete mismatch. I don't know how North Dakota State is going to cover any of these guys on the perimeter. And so I just think it's going to end up being that early on, I may be sweating it a little bit, but I think eventually Colorado's just athletes overall on the perimeter is going to be too much. For this North Dakota State team, I think North Dakota State's speed, they're not going to be able to keep up with Colorado in the 4-quarter game. I do think that Colorado is going to be a little bit better on the line of scrimmage, enough to where I think they can hold up in this game. I don't know that they can hold up across an entire schedule. I'm not sitting there saying Colorado is going to compete for a Big 12 championship or anything like that. I'm saying Colorado is going to cover the spread against North Dakota State week 1. So I like Colorado -9 in this spot.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason kind of Dion was a little skittish about playing this game in the first place and kind of, jokingly mad about, hey, his AD schedule in this game and, start me off with someone easier like TCU last year, whatever. He didn't say that. I said that.
But that's a good point. We saw with an entire offseason to prepare what they looked like last year at TCU on offense or whatever. Again, they've got all this time to prepare for this game. I just think that the skill position weapons for Colorado is going to be too much here.
Yeah, the thing is for North Dakota State is none of these teams are scheduling them anymore. Like they played Arizona a couple years ago, and it was 31-28 against Arizona. The last time before that they played an FBS team was 2016 when they went into Kinnick and they beat Iowa in week 3. So I guess props to Colorado for actually scheduling them and being willing to play them. Obviously, that was made, years in advance, but you got to give these guys, a shot. And that's the thing. That's the trepidation I have with North Dakota State is when they've been given the shot, no matter how good, how many losses they've had, whatever, they've always shown up to the fight and taken it to the big boys.
Yeah, I think they will show up for a fight. I'm not worried. I'm not doubting that. They're going to show up and hit Colorado in the mouth on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I just don't think that they've got anybody that can cover all of those cats on the perimeter for Colorado. I just don't. I don't know how they're going to keep up with them in space. And I think it's going to end up being, again, early on, North Dakota State may hit them in the mouth, but I think eventually Colorado's athletes will take over. And again, at a 9-point line, this game can be a war, and Colorado still cover. It could be a 34-24 game, and that's a cover. That's all we're asking for here. Not asking for a beatdown. We just want to win, baby, win. Just cover for me.
That's all we were asking for Florida State yesterday, and they obviously failed to do that. So
I'm hoping odds makers aren't too far off on week 1 like they were week 0.
Yeah. Next game, and probably the last game we'll touch on, I think, for now, is a return game from last year where Minnesota went in, I think, week 3 last year. They went into Chapel Hill and played North Carolina. They took a 31-13 loss. They got the return game coming back week 1, Thursday night. It'll be probably the one that most people tune into other than the Colorado game to see how the Buffaloes do. North Carolina going into Minnesota, PJ Fleck versus Mac Brown. Right now, line's at 1.5. It was 2.5, a week or so ago. So looks like money's coming in a little bit on the Tar Heels. Obviously, a ton of turnover, especially at the quarterback position for both of these teams.
So actually, the line opened, I think, at Minnesota plus 1.5, and now Minnesota's -1.
Okay.
So, but Max Johnson, he transferred from Texas A&M's quarterback now from North Carolina. Drake May's gone to the NFL. Amarian Hampton's back for North Carolina, one of the best running backs in the country. And I think you had him on your top 10 running backs list, didn't you?
Yeah, you're right, actually. So I'm looking at this, and DraftKings actually has Minnesota +1, and FanDuel has North Carolina +1.5.
Yep.
So it's kind of right there on the pick'em range, and
right.
If you don't know who you like, I would just maybe take money line, but yeah.
Yeah, so I gave out Minnesota as a win total this year, over 5.5. I mean, last year was the outlier in PJ Fleck's coaching career so far as a head coach. The previous 3 years before that, in the 3 full seasons, Minnesota, one year won 11 games, and then they won 9 games, I think, twice. So last year was an outlier. This year, they return a ton of production back on both sides of the line of scrimmage, on the defensive line and the offensive line. That's going to be the strength of this team, is the D-line and the O-line. I love what they brought in as the new quarterback, and Max Brosmer, he led the FCS in passing last year. We've talked about him a lot, actually, in our previous episodes. But he threw for over 3,400 yards last year at New Hampshire. And in the backfield, Darius Taylor was a true freshman tailback last year. The dude played in 5 full games last year and had 800 yards rushing at almost 6 yards per carry, and he was the leading rusher in the Big Ten before he went down with an injury. He came back for the bowl game, and I know it was Bowling Green, but he ran wild against Bowling Green in the bowl game. So he's back at tailback. The problem is they didn't have anybody behind Darius Taylor last year. Now they do. PJ Fleck made sure that was not going to be the case this year, that if they experienced an injury again at tailback, that they had reinforcements. And they brought in a guy by the name of Cy Ben-Gura from Ohio U, who rushed for over 1,700 yards and 19 touchdowns the last 2 years for the Bobcats. And they also brought in an Oklahoma transfer, Marcus Major. So they're 3 deep at running back now. And so I think it's going to, obviously, the way the line is, I think it's going to be a great football game. But I'm going to break out the oar, and I'm going to row that boat, baby. And I'm going to take Minnesota right now at +1.5. I may even take them on the money line, like you said a minute ago. Might as well if I'm going to get. But right now, the official pick is the Gophers at home, and PJ Fleck at +1.5 against North Carolina. I think that this could be, as far as your Thursday, Friday games, this probably could be your most highly contested best game before Saturday of week 1.
Yeah, I'll probably end up on the money line with you again, with you too, with Minnesota. And it's funny too. I'm on North Carolina over 7.5 wins for the season. But this is one of the games that I factored in them losing, and their ACC schedule is so weak. But yeah, this is the 40th Big Ten versus ACC matchup since 2017. And not that this is the end all be all. And, we say this about trends every year. They don't really mean anything, but if you want to be a trend guy, sometimes it fits and sometimes that narrative fits, and, maybe it does, conference versus conference. But the Big Ten is 24-15-1 against the spread versus the ACC. And they've gone 500 against the spread, 500 or better against the spread in 6 of the last seasons. And obviously Minnesota's getting this at home, breaking in a new quarterback from North Carolina and Max Johnson. Obviously Amarian Hampton's still there. The Minnesota rush defense is going to have their hands full with him, and Mac Brown's a solid coach. You can never count one of his teams out. And like you said, too, I mean, Minnesota breaking in a new quarterback against, what's probably going to be a suspect North Carolina defense, but maybe we said that about Georgia Tech.
I was going to say
new defensive coordinators, right?
Right. The hire that it looks like that Georgia Tech going out and hire, we talked about it, Tyler Santucci. Well, North Carolina goes out and hired Jeff Collins, and that was that we also talked about in our win totals when you gave out North Carolina over that could turn out to be one of your sneaky better hires overall in the ACC, because if North Carolina the last 3 or 4 years, well, really the entire Mac Brown era in North Carolina, that they've been the antithesis of Iowa. With Iowa can play great defense but can't move the ball at all on offense. North Carolina can score on anybody and can light it up. They've scored the most points and had the most yards in the ACC in the last 4 or 5 years, but they can't stop anybody. And they've been recycling defensive coordinators there for the last few years, but Jeff Collins is the best defensive coordinator that they brought in at this point. So be interested to see what kind of difference he can make. Hopefully he doesn't make that big of a difference week 1. But I think Minnesota, with the veteran offensive line that they're going to have in this new stable of backs, I think the Gophers will be able to run the football and control the game on offense and keep the ball away from Max Johnson and that North Carolina offense.
Yeah, college football is just nuts. I mean, especially this season, there's just so many different unknowns. That we just, as good as we think Georgia is going to be, and Oregon and Ohio State and Texas, a lot of teams still just have unknowns out there. And that's thanks, in part due to the transfer portal and guys coming over from different teams and how are they going to fit and how the coordinator's going to fit and all that stuff. So it's going to be a blast this week, kind of just dissecting some of these first week games. And it's just going to be a blast all season. Just kind of going through, every week and just talking college football, man. You got any other games you want to touch on? I know that we talked about Thursday, Friday, and we could probably get to Friday games on our next episode that'll be out on Thursday morning. But anything else you want to touch on?
I'll just allude to it. I have not pulling the trigger yet, but I'm taking a look at TCU Stanford over the total. It's at 61. Just because, TCU's offense last year was still really good, scored a ton of points, ton of yards. Stanford was literally one of the worst defenses in the entire country last year, and I don't think they're going to be much more improved this year, but they can score. And Troy Taylor's offense at Stanford, they can score. So that, to me, has got track meet written all over it between those two teams. Yeah. I don't see how Stanford's going to keep TCU from getting in the 40s, and I think Stanford can get in the 20s on TCU. So, the only thing that's keeping me from pulling the trigger right here in this episode is I'm a little worried about that. That total doesn't make sense to me at 61. Yeah. I feel like it should be higher, but we'll cover that on the next episode.
Yep. So stay tuned for the next episode. It could be out on Thursday. Again, thank you guys for listening. Hit us up on socials, like and subscribe to the podcast, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, everything. And we'll see you next time.